Being a freak by yourself in your town, which we both kind of were, was, not healthy, and pretty scary.
Yeah.
But when you had at least one other freak, if you had this one other person that thought the same way you did, I think it really helped. It helped us psychologically. I think to know we're not completely alone in this weird thought that we could make a living playing rock and roll.
You're listening to Staring at the World with BoDeans, Kurt Newman, a T. Torrance Productions original podcast.
Hey everybody, Kurt Newman here, staring at the world today with rock and roll royalty, and I'm not kidding about that. My next guest is a writer, producer, arranger, musician, actor, fixer of all things out there. It's going to be incredible conversation. Stick around for Mr. Stevie Van Zandt. Hey everybody, my name is Kurt Newman, and today we are staring at the world with true rock and roll royalty. My next guest has been inducted into the Hall of Fame. He's a famous actor. He's written books. I would describe him as a writer, producer, arranger, musician, actor, and apparently fixer of all things out there. If you got a problem, one of your first calls is going to be to my next guest. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show, Stevie Van Zandt. Applause, 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 applause. I'm so happy you could join us, man. I'm so psyched to talk to you. It seems like I'm surprised we haven't worked together before, actually, because I've been a fan of your music and I've been playing American rock and roll for so long that I'm surprised we haven't run into each other sooner. But when they told me you were available for an interview, I was just so happy to finally get to talk to you. And listening to your book was just wonderful. I really, really enjoyed it. I'm not a great reader because I'm a dyslexic kind of guy, but listening to the book in your voice was incredibly entertaining to me because I felt like you were really telling the story. And I would recommend it to anyone out there to go listen to the audiobook because you really hear Stevie in the character of being Stevie, right? But I wanted to ask you, when it comes to writing a book like this and this long and involved of your life, why now? Why did you decide now is the right time to put it down all on paper and let people know?
Yeah. No, I'm surprised we haven't gotten together myself, but we do play you regularly. I must say, in both of my formats, in both my Underground Garage format and also my Outlaw Country format. So
that is
you're
awesome.
Getting plenty of airplay on our two formats on Sirius Satellite. Why now? Yeah, I tried it like 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I really have no sense of time.
Yeah.
And it just didn't feel like I couldn't figure out any kind of ending, and so as it turns out, by bizarre circumstance, the last 3 years before the quarantine, 17, 18, and 19, I had three of the most productive years of my life. I reconnected with my music, which I had ignored for 30 years.
Yeah.
I did two tours, did two new albums, put out 6 album packages.
Yeah.
And it just felt like, okay, it felt like coming full circle, and some kind of closure on, at least that part of my life, which was most of my life.
Yeah.
And so it felt like I had an ending, which a friend of mine recommended because Paul McCartney had come on stage with me in one of those two tours on my stage, which was a remarkable thing for me.
Yeah.
And so the book kind of starts off with the Beatles and kind of ends with the Beatles, so it just felt kind of, okay, I got a beginning, middle, and an end here. And, and the quarantine, of course, allowed it to happen, without which I don't think I ever would have written a book, to tell you the truth.
Really? That's incredible. I wanted to ask you that too, because and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your beginnings in music, because so much of your book, I felt like I know this. I felt this same kind of feelings, but several people our ages kind of talk about this same experience of seeing the Beatles and Ed Sullivan kind of igniting. It was like you describe it as a big bang almost in the universe of something happened that it ignited this energy in so many different musicians that decided like this is what I want. This is where I need to go. This is a path I need to follow. Can you talk a little bit about that and your first, because you talk about music in the beginning almost being religious to you, and how it touched you. And it was very much like that with me too. So will you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's a little hard to, for young people to understand, but and I realized quite a bit of what's in my book no longer exists. But the idea of a band was kind of a new idea. Now, if you grew up in the 50s, I kind of missed the 50s. I had to go back and rediscover the 50s. But by the time I started listening to music, you didn't see 4 or 5 guys playing and singing. There was no such thing.
Yeah.
If you went to your high school dance, it was an instrumental group. Mm. And so the Beatles, and I always combine it with the Rolling Stones, who came 4 months later.
Yeah.
But the Beatles revealed this entirely new world to us, which not only changed musicians like me and you, but also affected the actual culture. We became a band culture there for a while.
Yeah.
Right through the 80s. It lasted a good 20, 30 years. If you were going out at night, if you were a teenager and you were going out at night, you would either go to the drive-in theater to see a movie, or you go see a band. And that did not exist before the Beatles. So all of a sudden, bands were everywhere, and some of us actually started bands at that moment, and like I say, everybody had a band in their garage.
Yeah.
But about a dozen of us got out of the garage in our local area, and I'm sure it was the same thing in every town.
Yeah, very much in the Midwest. That's what I was saying. Like you were on the East Coast and I was in the Midwest, but very similar story. You talk about some things that really were important in the beginning too. You cite, for one, the portable record player being instrumental in what really turning on teenagers because they could listen to their own music instead of listening in the living room. And you talk about the idea of clubs that actually gave you the ability to go and learn your craft. In Wisconsin, the drinking law stayed 18 for a long, long time when all the other states were up at 21. And for a band like us, that made all the difference in the world on having 3 or 4 different places we could go and play our music. Can you talk about that a little bit? Yeah.
We were really the luckiest generation in that sense. There were clubs, even before you got to the bar band stage. I was talking about the rock world in 3 stages, which is the teenage years, the bar band years, and the business. If you get into the actual music business, so we the teenage years were amazing because you'd never be that free again. You could do anything you wanted.
Yeah.
Because the adults at that time wouldn't even think about trying to tell you what to do. They had no idea what you were doing.
Yeah.
If you wanted this new thing called rock and roll, you had to go to a 15-year-old to get it. You couldn't go to a 25-year-old to get it. You had to go to a 15-year-old to get it. And they just, whatever we did was fine with them.
Yeah.
And then of course you get the bar band years, and it's a whole different, whole different story. I don't know if you had it any easier, but we had a really tough time breaking into the bar band world because they had all kinds of rules. You had to play the top 40, at least in New Jersey, You had, and by the 70s, the top 40 was no longer cool. It was very cool in the 60s. I mean, you couldn't.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned,
Yeah.
60s pop is the absolute epitome of our art form.
Yeah.
But by the 70s, things are starting to get diluted because the energy was going into albums, and it was a different thing happening. So they wanted you to play the top 40, which was not cool. So we had to find. We kept getting fired. We go and try and get a gig and get fired, and then finally we found a club with the roof had caved in, and they weren't being very picky, and we just said, listen, man, you don't have to pay us anything. We'll take the door, you take the bar, but we want to play whatever we want. So they were going to close, in like 4 weeks anyway. So they said, yeah, all right, go ahead,
Yeah.
and that's how we broke that complete, that those rules were not broken by anybody until we did it.
Right.
And
was that the Stone Pony?
Yeah.
That's funny because to us in the Midwest, when we were starting out, Stone Pony became legendary because of what you guys had kind of done there. You had turned it into this nationally known legendary rock place. So when we were coming up, we were one of those bands like, well, we have to play the Stone Pony. We just have to, just to say that you were there and you got to play that room and be in it was one of those things I felt like a check off on my list because we had heard so much about it. Now, where you were doing it, it was just like, well, this is just a dumpy little club where I get to learn what I'm doing. But it's funny how it becomes part of rock and roll, royalty eventually that everybody wants to play there then.
Well, for many years after our residency ended, we were there. Southside Johnny and Asbury Jukes had the residency for a couple of years. And for many years after we left, and maybe to this day, but certainly in the next 5 to 10 years after we left, that audience was a different audience, and people used to love playing there. Bands would come over from England and they wanted to play the Stone Pony first, and the audience was just tuned into digging what was happening at that moment. Because we played new songs all the time, and we played songs that they didn't know all the time.
Right.
You know what I mean? So we kind of trained the audience's ears to dig something that was new instead of, the usual routine is, you want them to be familiar with your stuff, and the more familiar with your stuff, the audience is, the better they're going to be.
Yeah.
Well, the Stone Pony audience was an exception to that rule. They would react spontaneously to what they were hearing for many years after that. And so people always loved playing that club for that reason.
Yeah. Where we came from, we were playing on the east side of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And Milwaukee they didn't see the trends, I tell people this always about our bands and even the Violent Femmes as well as another band that came out of our same city, was that because it wasn't trendy, you just had to do something good that made them want to get up from their table and dance a little bit,
Yeah.
And that's how they judged you completely because there was no trend there. They weren't trendy. And so they would sit there and look at you for a couple songs. And if they liked your energy and they liked what you were doing, they might applaud a little bit or get up and dance a little bit. And even I remember Time Magazine or someone wrote an article about us talking about that. Like if you could get these people up away from their beers, that was really an accomplishment. Then you were ready to go around the whole country and play because that was difficult.
Yeah.
But that's where you I think in your book you're talking about that's where you really learn to play. And in today's music, we've kind of lost that. I think you call it a weeding out process that's going on with music.
Yeah. I talk about the 5 crafts of rock in the book in great detail. One of which is playing live. And I gave great emphasis to exactly what you just said, which was we were all dance bands in those days.
Yeah.
And this goes back to the Beatles and the Stones and the Who and the Kinks and everybody else. Dave Clark 5. You talk to them and they'll tell you the same exact story. They were all dance bands, which means you had to get people out of their chairs and dancing, or you did not work, the next week. And that went for us too. Even though we were playing a different kind of music, we still had to make them dance. And my own thought, my own theory of that is that takes extra energy to do that. And so when we all then converted into concert bands, which would happen, after that, those of us who had that extra energy, I think, became the more successful concert bands because, even though we're no longer necessarily making people dance, although people still do to some extent, but we had that extra energy of pulling people out of their chairs, and you could feel that from the Stones, you could feel that from the Beatles, and that's where it comes from. It comes from being a dance band originally, which I think is a long lost sort of craft.
Thank you to our next sponsor, Be Bold Bars. My favorite energy bars are back. Be Bold Bars were founded by Stacy Madison, the founder of Stacy's Pita Chips. They're refrigerated energy bars that are made with nuts, nut butters, chia, honey, maple, and cinnamon. They're delicious on purpose. All 4 of the bars are gluten-free, dairy-free, and plant-based. These bars have no preservative. That's why they are refrigerated. They hold only great taste, but are such a great alternative to all the garbage that you can get out there trying to find good food. I think you guys should try them. They're a great way to fuel your body and support a woman-owned business. So here's the deal. You're going to get 20% off if you use the code BOLD, B-O-L-D, for 20% off all 4 flavors at beboldbars.com. That's code BOLD, B-O-L-D, for 20% off at beboldbars.com. It was a struggle for us too. We got so good at the clubs and the energy and the moving and the sweating and stuff. When we started being booked into theaters, it was really a weird transition for us to have an audience sitting in nice seats and security telling them to sit down and not move and stuff like that. And
terrible.
To this day, I wrestle with that very much. I just last week played a show where people came out in front, started moving, and the security's just like, no. And it's never made any sense to me. Like the whole reason people are here is to shake. That's what we're doing here. And so, did you guys struggle with that at all? I mean, because how did that affect you?
Yeah, I mean, really, to some extent, with both bands, both the E Street Band and then with my own Disciples of Soul, you hit those first couple of gigs and they're theaters with seats, and you realize this is a mistake. Yeah. Okay, and then as soon after that, I started demanding, ballrooms. I said, I don't want to see any seats. Yeah. They can put seats up in the balcony, but I don't want people sitting down anymore. I mean, I just can't. It just doesn't work. We went over with the E Street Band, and the first gig we did was Hammersmith Odeon, and man, it took us 2.5 hours to win them over. I mean, they finally stood up like in the 2 hours and 40th minute. And I was like, man, that's too much work. We want to get them halfway there, just right from the beginning.
I know that feeling. Yeah, they come up. You're on your last 3 songs, and they're up, and then they're like, okay, now we want another hour. And you're like, where were you? What were you doing?
Exactly.
And so now they finally do. But I think you guys got pretty good at incorporating some real drama into the music. Certainly. As you went along, which really does help. At my age now, I figure people are old, and some of them are just going to want to sit there and chill out and watch, and I'm going to just do what I do and be as entertaining as I can, and it's cool if you want to sit or if you want to get up or not. But I remember at the time that was tough. That was really tough to make that transition.
Yeah. It's different according to what music you're making, and I think what age you are. I think you're right. That stuff all changes. As you become, you start to express yourself in more, in longer songs or in more cinematic type songs, where they're telling a story that maybe it's a slower tempo, you make that adjustment, if you want to, but yeah, in the beginning, I mean, when you're young and you got all that energy, you want that energy to be exchanged with the audience.
And so all you guys were kind of, you and the Jukes, and then you and Bruce ran into each other. I think you talk about you were surprised that you found each other both in New York City around the Village because you were both looking for what was going on musically, and that kind of you recognized something in each other that was like, oh, this guy gets it, and was that kind of a start of your friendship then, because that musical bonding that you both were looking for something or felt something?
Yeah, you were if you were in a band, you were friends automatically because it was weird. It was weird to be in a band
and hard. It was tough, a lot of work.
Yeah, but it just wasn't done. You were a freak if you were in a band in 1965, 1966.
Yeah.
So you were friends automatically. But then I started running in, and it was only an hour. I don't know, maybe an hour and 15 on the bus. But that extra little bit of ambition, that made me go to another town, and him doing the same thing, we realized that we're both freaks, but being a freak by yourself in your town, which we both kind of were, was not healthy, and pretty scary.
Yeah.
But when you had at least one other freak, if you had just one other person that thought the same way you did, I think it really helped. It helped us psychologically. I think to know we're not completely alone in this weird thought that we could make a living playing rock and roll. Which was still a ridiculous long shot.
Yeah.
But we just everybody kept saying, well, you got to have something to fall back on. You got to.
Totally.
You gotta plan your life like for real. You can have your fun on the weekend playing this rock and roll thing, but you're not serious about trying to do it for a living. And we just neither one of us had a plan B.
Right.
Just like this is it. It's this or I'm gonna end up in the gutter, whatever.
That's exactly what it was like. For me too. And when they asked me to do a podcast, that's really what I wanted to get to with people on this podcast was no matter who I'm talking to about kind of a story, there's a point where you're either going to follow this voice inside you, this intuition you have, or you're not, and I keep talking to people on this podcast about that, about following that intuition kind of thing, that creative voice inside you, because it's there for a reason. And a lot of people, for whatever circumstances they're growing up in, learn to push that away or push that aside. And it's exactly what you're talking about, I think, right there. You have a lot of people around you saying they're like, my parents said to me the exact same thing. Like, if you like music, maybe you could be an electrician and you could fix guitar amps. And I was like, how does that make any sense, Because you're either going to do this or you're going to die trying, right? And I literally said that to my mom at the time, but that seems to me the point where you guys kind of found a friendship, you found an alliance, and you've said, we're going to listen to this intuition, Yeah.
Look, I'd like to pretend it's really like noble, what we did.
No, yeah, I know what you're saying.
But the fact is, we couldn't do anything else.
Right. Exactly.
We were completely inept at everything else.
I know.
We couldn't. We were, too small for sports, didn't really want to go to college, and wasn't crazy about the military idea. So we were just like, we were basically what they used to call bums, and so it was the only thing we could do, and it just felt like, man, it's the only thing I want to do in my life. I just don't want to do anything else,
right.
At the time.
But probably like me, you guys probably tried working some other jobs here and there. I was working in a freaking car wash, drying off cars. It's like, what are you going to do that? Or are you going to do this other thing that feels so right, Yeah,
we all did the car wash. The car wash. I worked construction for 2 years, man. You want to go running back to show business, pick up a jackhammer,
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't get back to, entertainment fast enough.
Right. No, I hear you there. And what was the point? I know because you were doing your own stuff and you were working with Southside Johnny Asbury Jukes, and you were helping out a lot of people musically. But at some point, Bruce had kind of called you up to start working with, him and the E Street Band and stuff like that. Whenabouts was that, and what was the decision there?
Well, I was not only, in the band, I was co-lead singer with Southside, and I was also arranging and,
Right.
arranging stuff and really managing the band too.
Yeah.
And so Bruce was hanging around with us because his first two records had done nothing.
Right.
And once you're in the business, as you know, you then have to play different places.
Yeah.
At least in those days, there were the showcase clubs in every town that you had to play.
Yeah.
And, once you did them, the idea was you then get bigger and go back and you either play 2 nights at that place,
Yeah.
or 3 nights eventually, and then you graduate to the theater level. There was a whole system in place.
Right.
So he had done the showcase clubs, and the records were still doing nothing.
Yeah.
So he couldn't work.
Yeah.
So now he's coming out and he's hanging out with us at our residency.
Right.
And so finally his third record's coming. The record company wants to drop him, and he has 7 gigs booked. And he says, I gotta try one last thing here,
Right.
to see if I can, break through it, which is I'm gonna try fronting the band. Can you join and be the guitar player for these 7 gigs while I try fronting for a change, putting the guitar down
Sure.
and just being a singer. And literally it was only 7 gigs left.
Yeah.
And so I was like getting, the bar wars, as we called it, it wasn't easy. I mean, we had to threaten the owners to go across the street just to get it down from 5 sets to 3 sets a night, which
Right.
we also made history doing that because everybody played 5 sets in those days. And I thought we really paid our dues until Ringo told me that, the Beatles played 6 sets a night, 7 nights a week, 7 nights a week.
Yeah.
For months at a time. I'm like, damn, okay. It made me feel lazy now.
Yeah.
But so I was kind of tired of the whole fighting with the owners and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I said, I'll take a break, and so I just joined them really for those 7 gigs. And suddenly he started to blossom. He was a very shy guy and very shy, very introverted. And suddenly he just blossomed into this amazing frontman almost overnight, And the reaction of the crowd really was different.
Yeah.
It was a different, suddenly, now we didn't exactly break through on that third record. It got some airplay, Born to Run.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a hit. People think it was a hit, but it wasn't. But it was certainly a breakthrough, in a way, not only musically, because his third album was quite different than the first 2 in every way.
Yeah.
It was the beginning of him finding this identity, which he wouldn't really find until the next one, till Darkness on the Edge of Town.
Yeah.
But it was the beginning of a certain theatricality, a certain bringing the music to life in a new way that really started to connect. You could tell the audience reaction really started to be amazing, and so I ended up staying 7 years. I went for 7 gigs and stayed 7 years.
Right. Which
and
is
we started.
incredible time, but I'd like to go back to the book because you start the epilogue of the book. I have to say to people, another reason to listen to it, I felt like at times I was listening to an Indiana Jones movie almost, because the book starts with you under a blanket in the backseat of a car in South Africa, and you're talking about leaving after 7 years of finally becoming a rock and roll star to putting it all aside now to do some other really important things in your life that you struggled to even make sense of in your own mind, right? I mean, that's the way it came across.
Yeah.
Like, wow, what am I doing
Yeah.
here? Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, your delve into politics, I think you said it was in your mind starting as journalism, but it became something almost much bigger.
Yeah. Sirens going by, which is appropriate for this part of the story. But I got obsessed with politics, and and when I left the E Street Band, the first half of the book, it's kind of like two different books. The first half of the book is local kid makes it to the top of rock and roll, and that's a great story, and I don't mean to sound ungrateful about that.
Right.
It was a miracle,
Right.
But then I think that the themes start to widen for people who may not be into music, and suddenly the second half of the book becomes a search for identity, a search for purpose in life, a search for enlightenment, spiritual enlightenment, the bigger themes that I think are more relatable by everybody, because when and the interesting thing I think is when I left the band, I didn't just change jobs. I really ended my life.
Yeah.
So I had no idea what was coming next. I was on this path of politics, and I went because I now was putting all my energy into it. I went from being a musician / journalist, which I was on those first couple of albums, to a musician / journalist / activist.
Yeah.
I started to really get involved in the South Africa thing, and I think what's most interesting, what people take away from the book, what I hope they take away is, everybody hits a wall in their life. Everybody hits that, maybe gets some kind of disappointment. Maybe your dreams don't work out, your first dream or your first job, or and what my story I think shows is, if you can keep it going, if you just keep moving forward somehow, and don't get destroyed by booze or drugs or commit suicide, all of which I considered. If you can just find a way to move forward, destiny has a way of surprising you. And in my case, everything I've accomplished in my life literally happened after I thought my life was over,
Yeah.
And I think people, can look at that and maybe and hopefully be inspired a little bit by that, because I mean, literally, my life was over. I lost all my friends. I lost all my income, and I'm just, under a blanket going into Soweto and thinking like, how the fuck did I get here?
Yeah.
How did I go from,
walking into a room full of machetes? I mean, myself, I can't even imagine. And that's the thing. You read about these incredible stories and you're trying to, you hear it, but I can't imagine putting myself there or coming to that point of there's something bigger here that I want to get involved in, that I'm willing to take this very great position I'm in, touring in a rock and roll band at the highest level, to putting it all aside and going somewhere else. That's truly an incredible, tough decision. But again, I'm guessing there was a big voice inside you saying, we need to do this.
Oh no, yeah, no. It was not a career choice. Yeah, no. It was an obsession, and really, I started to feel destiny in a true sense of that word, if you will.
Yeah.
I thought, well, this is bigger than rock and roll. I mean, this may be the reason why I'm on the planet. This is my justification for existence, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah. This thing I found in my mind, which is being able to figure out these very complex problems and know what the solution to the problems are. This was a part of my brain I didn't know existed, first of all, but it just felt like well, maybe this is why I'm here. Maybe this is my rationalization for existence. And so that combined with that feeling of I just committed suicide and therefore I have no fear anymore of anything,
Right.
which was true. I had no fear.
Yeah.
So that kind of liberated you to go into some dangerous places.
Yeah.
But it also gave you the ability to go in with as much depth as you wanted to, because it was everything. All that mattered to me was convincing these guys with machetes that I could win their war for them. Okay. And their machete was not going to win the war. Okay.
Yeah.
And, and they needed to stop, setting people on fire and stop shooting people, because these were the guys these are killers.
Yeah.
I'm like, you're not going to win this way. I'm going to win your war on TV. And I'm talking to guys who have no electricity. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Not only do they not have a TV, they don't have electricity, and they're like, yeah, you're going to win the war on TV. Okay. I think that they thought I was such a lunatic. I think that they just kind of let me go, because they were considering killing me. But I think they figured this guy really, this guy can't really do us any harm. He's just a nut, So they, in the end, they let me go and semi-endorsed my idea. You know what I mean? I don't know how enthusiastic they were, but by then I told them I already had the endorsement.
Yeah.
From the two major political parties, of which they were, functioning related to, so I already had the, once I had the endorsement of Mandela's party and also the opposition party,
right?
They just kind of went along with it.
Well, that's why in the introduction I talked to you about a fixer of all things, kind of, because it seems to me there's a theme in the book of people either calling you or you calling them in some instances and applying common sense to getting problems, often complex problems, solved with some basic common sense of getting a couple different parties to come to the table and see things logically and therefore find a solution. And it seems to me people would call you for that many times and put you in that role.
And I discovered a methodology to do these things that was kind of unusual, because the typical thing when there's a problem is get everybody in the room and sit down at that table and hash it out, And I realized that's really not the way to get things done.
Right.
The way to get things done is to figure out the proper solution and then sell it to everybody one at a time.
Right.
Okay, and then they'll agree with your agenda, and before you know it, they're all in agreement with each other without knowing it.
Yeah.
Okay, so it eliminates the ego of whose idea is whose, and am I getting the proper credit for this? Am I getting the proper visual ingredients of this solution? I just found it much easier to just talk to everybody separately, see what they needed, and then get the agreement from everybody separately, and then before you know it, everybody is in complete agreement without knowing it.
Yeah, you tell a story though of raising money for Nelson Mandela in New York when they needed to put together something and kind of getting snubbed at the end of it, or almost snubbed. And it seems to me there's a theme in the book too of you kind of coming in as the arbitrator, the resolution guy, and then everyone just kind of patting you on the back saying, thanks, we'll take it from here. And then not giving you a whole lot of anything for it, which is, what does that feel like for you? Because you're instrumental in these things, you had a lot to do with it, but very often you just gotta, say not much at the end, but know that you helped.
Yeah, I mean, I'm, of all the religions, I'm probably closest to being a Taoist, which, these kind of things, if you actually help out a situation, it has to be its own reward. Yeah. Don't expect a pat on the back. Don't expect, it's every good deed gets punished, kind of a world, so you can't expect, you can't do it for that reason. If you're doing something, do it for its own sake, do it for yourself.
Yeah.
That's what I learned very, very early, and don't expect any thanks. And you have to be okay with that or stay home. I mean, that's just the way it is in this world. So I just decided it makes me feel good. I was embarrassed by my country's policy in South Africa. And that's the bottom line. It was embarrassing.
Yeah.
I wanted to fix I wanted to fix it because it's embarrassing.
Yeah.
Suddenly I discovered I'm an American, which was a big shock to me.
Yeah.
What? I'm an American? It was one other thing. What do you mean I'm an American? What does that mean? Oh shit, I might have some responsibilities that go with that or obligations. I mean, that was big news to me, man. That was a revelation at the age of 30,
Yeah.
I mean, I managed to go 30 years without a single political thought in my head.
Yeah.
But suddenly there it was, and bam, so you're trying to play catch up ever since, just kind of do the right thing for its own sake.
Yeah.
Because nobody's going to thank you. Nobody's going to pat you on the back, and that's got to be okay with you,
Yeah. And I think the sentence I wrote down that you said in the book too was you can be a patriot and a globalist at the same time, right? Like you're an American, but we're also here floating in this rock in space together. And, we should be able to get along, or it really is probably going to be the end of all of us as a species if we don't. And I think, I'm assuming, but that was kind of your perspective on it, is like, it doesn't mean you're not a patriot just because you're working on other people's problems as well, because that's what you're saying. The responsibility is American and your government and how you see it, that all works together.
I do see it that way. I see a Declaration of Human Rights kind of idea.
Yeah.
I do find that is something that we all have in common, or should have in common, and if that's some kind of, how can we put it, moral imperialism, then so be it. I'm not one of those people who's against, nation building. We're always hearing, oh, well, we don't want to be nation building.
Right.
And I'm like, well, depends what that means. I don't want to be nation building in terms of stealing their money, which is what it mostly means. What imperialism really means is going somewhere and stealing their resources and taking advantage of the local population.
Yeah.
But if I'm bringing democracy and human rights and equal rights for women and equal rights for gay people and all the rest of it, if I'm bringing that with me, hey man, I believe that is universal.
Yeah.
I don't buy like, well, my religion doesn't believe in that. I'm sorry. I don't.
Yeah.
That's why I'm very much against Islamic states being born. That's why I went crazy over the Afghanistan horror that, our friend Joe Biden just blew it, man.
Yeah.
I mean, 20 years and $2 trillion. I'd like to know where that went, but we had gotten to the point where, we had 350,000 troops, and we hadn't lost a soldier in a year and a half, and we could have kept Kabul, and we could have kept some cities, and we could have kept the airports forever, and maintained the progress that we had made in Afghanistan, so that those 2,300 guys didn't die in vain, guys and girls, instead now the 2,300 did die in vain, just like the 50,000, 58,000 in Vietnam, which is just a terrible thing. And we created a new Islamic State, which is absolutely a complete, contradiction to all human rights. I'm sorry, I don't believe everybody, just because it's your religion, that means it's right. Quite the contrary,
Yeah.
I know. So I just think some things are universal.
Yeah.
And and women's equal rights is one of them. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
you can wrap your women up like mummies and treat them like I don't know what, but that doesn't make it right, you know.
Right. Well, that's it. We stared at the world today with Stevie Van Zandt. I can't tell you how long this guy's been making music, and I've been influenced by it in my life. It was incredible to be able to spend some time talking to him, and I'm so grateful you guys all joined us for this conversation. And, I'm going to ask you again, please download or subscribe or be part of this podcast as much as you can. I certainly appreciate anyone joining in and listening to us, because otherwise I'm just a guy in a room talking to myself. So thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for more.
Thanks for listening to Staring at the World with BoDeans, Kurt Newman, a podcast about creative innovation. Please be sure to download, subscribe, rate, and review, and keep listening wherever you get your podcasts.